abortion was illegal in Britain until 1967. Then it was introduced as part of a series of reforms which were introduced in the 1960s to do with divorce, the rights of gay men, abortion, equal pay. All of these things happened more or less at the same time. And there have been a number of years of people campaigning to have legal abortion. The abortion that we got in 1967 was not for everybody. It still had restrictions. You had to have 2 doctors who agreed to the abortion, and there had to be physical or social reasons why women were able to have abortions. But it was a very big step forward. What happened then is that many young women were able to have legal abortions for the first time in ever, really.
The biggest difference is not that abortion takes place, because abortion took place all the time before the abortion law was passed. But it was criminal, it took place in dangerous circumstances. Many women died as a result of backstreet abortions, and many women were permanently injured as a result of backstreet abortions. So that's not a big difference. Now abortion takes place, but it takes place safely and legally.
The whole discussion on abortion rights has to be posed from the point of view of choice, that a woman has to have the right to choose whether on what happens to her body. And it cannot be the church, it cannot be the state, it cannot be her husband, it cannot be her father or mother, it can't be her family or friends. Only a woman, only the person has the right to choose what happens to their body.
Around the world, every year there are 20 million unsafe abortions. At least 50,000 women die because of unsafe abortion, and most of them are in countries where abortion is illegal or very restricted. So when women don't have access to safe legal abortion, they will find another way to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. So they will go to an unsafe backstreet abortionist, they will find some dreadful home remedy, they will throw themselves downstairs, or nowadays increasingly women will go online and they will buy abortion pills. Now medical abortion is very safe, but if you don't know who you're buying medication from, you don't know what you're actually getting, what the dosage is, it can be very dangerous. So women will always find a way to terminate unwanted pregnancy. So we have to accept that, and we have to make sure that safe legal abortion is available for them.
A lot of the stigma about abortion has been removed, so women don't feel so much shame about it.
I think it's very important that women have the right to control their own bodies. You cannot talk about controlling your own life as a woman in any sense socially without also being able to control when and where you have children, how many children you have.
Britain was one of the countries in the world where women had been most incorporated into the workforce. Women had become most financially independent in the period after the Second World War, during the post-war boom. And this also coincided with a period in British society of increasing secularisation, fall in church attendance very sharply, a rise in divorce, and other social issues such as lesbian and gay rights came onto the agenda. Social position of women and the overall social conditions combined to create circumstances where it was possible and there was a strong support for a liberalisation of abortion rights. That was also driven by rising concern in sort of liberal circles about the impact of illegal abortion and the fact that many women died each year in very horrible circumstances because of illegally, we called it backstreet abortion. That is non-medical people who carried out abortions, and infection was rife, perforation of the uterus, all kinds of very serious medical conditions and deaths. And so in liberal opinion, there began to be a view that something had to be done about this. So these two factors coming together meant that it was possible to get a liberalisation, a legalisation of abortion. And this was led politically in Parliament by a member of the Liberal Democrat Party, which is a sort of right-wing centre party, but which has very liberal, or used to have very liberal social positions.
The big step to winning abortion in the 1960s was the changing nature of society, that women were having fewer and fewer children. They did not want to be having to suffer unwanted pregnancies. They were becoming more liberated sexually. They were more likely to go into higher education. They were beginning to go out to work in large numbers. So for all these reasons, women wanted more control over their bodies, and society was becoming liberalised at the same time. Also, people recognised that abortion has always existed. It's estimated that before the 1967 Act, 100,000 women a year had illegal abortions. These were very dangerous. They often resulted in serious injury to the women and sometimes in the death of the women. And it was recognised that it would be much more sensible to have a legal system where women could get abortions if they wanted to.
So before the 1967 Act and in the decades before the 1960s, there had been people campaigning for the decriminalisation of abortion and indeed for better contraception and better contraceptive awareness. But these had been, by and large, small groups of people. The difference in the 1960s came about as a result of two things. First of all, the increasing number of women entering the labour market in the United Kingdom. In the decades after the Second World War in Britain, many more women, millions of more women entered the labour market. And the second thing was the rise of liberal and progressive opinion in the 1960s in Britain. These two things came together to bring about a number of reforms to social rights in the UK, and one of those was the right to abortion. And when the legalisation of abortion came about in 1967, it was actually a very very limited, although it's a very important piece of legislation which has consistently been attacked. It's a very limited and specific piece of legislation. The grounds for abortion are very medical. The requirement of two doctors' agreement is needed, and various other things about the law which reflect the fact that when the law was changed, it was a compromise between these two different aspects: the rising pressure of women and other people for the legalisation of abortion or for the decriminalisation, and secondly, the realisation by capital, the bourgeoisie, employers, that to have women as a labour market, it was simply inefficient to have abortion and contraception.
I think it's happened in primarily in countries where the economic level of development is such that women become more independent, and it is women that insist in the fundamental situation that this law should exist. They assert the right to control their own bodies, the right to determine whether or not they will have a child, and that corresponds to a certain level of economic development. I think then there are other factors which come into play, which are the weight of the church, particularly the Catholic Church, which has very, very anti-abortion positions, and that can be an obstacle.
We need to work in our home countries, and I think we need to work internationally to raise awareness of the need for safe, legal abortion. I think it's important that women in Europe, in Western Europe, where there is good access to reproductive health care, as there is in Britain, that we make young women in particular aware of the suffering that their sisters in Latin America and Africa and Asia are going through. We need to make people aware that they are part of a global human rights struggle, a global struggle for women's rights, and to feel solidarity with the suffering of women in other parts of the world, and to make people aware of what's going on. And I think we need to work to change attitudes globally to the issue of abortion in general. We need to make people aware that it's allowing women to control their fertility, to decide when and whether and how many children to have. This is key to international development, to economic development, to improving standards of education and healthcare. It's key to so many international development issues that the world wants. And reproductive healthcare is right at the centre of that. And we need to make people stop thinking about their own religious views, their own ideological views, and start thinking about what's best for women and children throughout the world.
What happens is lots of people die because if you don't have a situation where there's freely available access to abortion, where people can get early abortions, which is very important, that they don't have to go a long way into pregnancy before they make this decision. When they can do all these things, actually, this is a much more satisfactory situation. Once it is hard for women to get abortions and therefore they have to travel and so on, lots more difficulties come in that they may then try to go to illegal abortions, they may try to miscarry in other ways, which is very dangerous to them. And of course what you particularly find problems with is very young women who may not know that they're pregnant or may not fully understand how their body works in this respect. And also women who are older, who are at menopause, who may not realise again that they're pregnant because their menstruation is more irregular. So all these things are important, and that's why I'm very much in favour of the right to abortion as early as possible, as quickly as possible, where people want it. If they don't want to have an abortion, that's absolutely fine. But and that's their decision, it's their right. They have the right to choose whether to have a baby or not. But they do have the right to abortion carried out as swiftly and as safely as possible.
Firstly, in nature, in many situations, an abortion takes place naturally. So this is not again, this happens. But secondly, we have to have a framework in society where people have a choice and make their own moral choice over such matters.
The main opposition to abortion comes from the Catholic Church, which believes that the destruction of a fetus is a sin and is the destruction of a living soul. And so this came very, very strongly from the Catholic Church, who organised rallies. They set up an organisation, they helped to set up an organisation called the Situacion for the Protection of the Unborn Child, which campaigned against abortion, and they campaigned in Catholic schools, they campaigned in the churches. They had a very powerful network. The other religions were less anti-abortion, it depends, but in the Church of England and in the other Protestant churches it isn't such an issue, and some church people supported the right of abortion. So it was only really the Catholics who had this very strong position against it. The government took a position that they were in favour of some liberalisation of abortion, but they never made this a government policy. They allowed MPs to vote in whichever way they wanted, which always meant that they were subject to pressure from anti-abortionists, and therefore the pro-abortion, the pro-choice people had to also campaign to achieve these things.
Many women who are practicing Catholics, Protestant, Christians, women of all different faiths, whatever their church opinion, they will have had abortions. And so it's very important to distinguish between the views of the heads of the churches and the views of the individual members of the religious communities. But by and large, the official position of most of the main religions is opposed to abortion.
In Ireland, for example, it's still totally illegal.
Where, sorry?
Ireland, both north and south, because of the dominance of all religions actually, because the northern Protestants are also very against women's equality and are against women's right to abortion. Many Irish women have to come to Britain to have abortions, and they do so in large numbers. In most countries in Europe, there is some legalisation of the abortion situation. In most countries it's not illegal.
The situation in the UK, well, in England, Scotland and Wales, is good. The vast majority of women who need to have an abortion can access one safely and legally and free of charge. But before 1967, it was illegal in the UK. And if it was made illegal again now, the situation would be very similar to how it was before. So women who could afford it, better off women would find a way to have a safe legal abortion. And women who couldn't afford it would risk their lives trying to get one, or they would be forced to continue with an unwanted pregnancy. So what that would mean now is that rich women would get on a plane and they would go to the nearest European country where abortion was legal, and less well-off women would go on the internet and would buy pills, which can be very dangerous. And those who couldn't do that would continue with an unwanted pregnancy, and that would be a great injustice.
The biggest struggles here have been after the law was changed. The law, since the 1967 Abortion Act was passed, there have been constant attacks on the law, and those attacks actually brought into existence the women's movement to defend the law, the National Abortion Campaign, Now Abortion Rights, various organisations formed to defend the law.
In 1975, they started an attempt to restrict the right of abortion. And this was a campaign which went on throughout the 1970s. Various MPs introduced bills in Parliament to make it harder for women to get abortions. And that was when the abortion campaign really started in 1975, a really big abortion campaign. Lots of young women were involved in it. I was one of the first people to go along to the meetings and be part of it. And we stopped these attacks on abortion, but we had to keep doing it. By the end of the 1970s, the trade unions, who didn't think that abortion was a big issue previously, had been won to a commitment of the right of a woman to choose whether or not she wanted to have a child, and therefore to choose whether to have an abortion. And at the end of the 1970s, there was a very, very big demonstration organised by the TUC for the first and last time they've ever done this, but in favour of a woman's right to choose. And that was a huge breakthrough in terms of abortion rights in this country.
And one of the biggest turning points was the adoption of the trade union movement of support for the 1967 Abortion Act. And in one of the biggest ever demonstrations at the beginning of the 1980s, the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, supported the right to abortion. And this reflected the organisation of women within the trade unions, organising, mobilising and winning the policy of the whole of the trade union movement to support the right to legal abortion.
Almost immediately after the passing of the 67 Act, there were attempts to overturn it with bills, attempts at legislation being put in Parliament. And there was the formation of a campaign based primarily on women's organisations in the first instance to fight off these attacks. This began to have very big support, particularly from the trade union movement, and so that by the early 1980s, a particular attempt to overturn the law called the Corrie Bill was met by an enormous demonstration led by the trade unions, organised primarily by women activists like myself, but with the support of the major trade unions. And it was that alliance of the labour movement and women's organisations which really came together repeatedly to stop the law being changed.
So our key fight in the UK now is for rights for women in Northern Ireland. At the moment, abortion is almost entirely illegal in Northern Ireland. So if women from there want to terminate an unwanted pregnancy, they have to leave their homes, they have to travel to the mainland UK or further abroad, and they have to pay for the procedure themselves. And this is a great injustice. They are British citizens, they are UK taxpayers, and they are denied the same rights as their sisters in England, Scotland and Wales. So we're campaigning to change that. But in the rest of the UK, although the situation is currently good, there are always attempts to restrict abortion, to make it more difficult, to put barriers up between women and their rights to reproductive health care. So in the last few years there have been attempts to bring down the abortion time limit. Currently it's at 24 weeks, but there have been attempts to bring it down to 20 weeks, 16 weeks, down as low as 12 weeks. And we know that the new health minister who's in charge of abortion services, he's actually fairly opposed to abortion rights. He would like to see the abortion time limit reduced dramatically down to 12 weeks. So that will be something that we have to be vigilant about and that we have to fight. Really, in the UK, you have to be in a state of constant vigilance because there are always politicians and religious people and conservative sectors of society that want to restrict women's access to abortion. So we always have to be ready to defend the right to choose.